Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're jumping into a design pattern that is a total lifesaver when it comes to turning messy, tangled code into something clean, organized, and way more manageable. We're talking about the Mediator pattern. So, let's get right into it.
So before we can even talk about the solution, we really have to get our heads around the problem it's trying to solve. And trust me, it's a super common problem that pretty much every developer runs into as their projects get bigger.
I want you to just picture this for a second. You've got a system with a bunch of different parts, or objects, and they all need to chat with each other. Well, when every object talks directly to every other object, you end up with this, a tangled mess we call spaghetti code. And the real headache, if you change just one of those objects, you might have to go fix 5 others that depend on it. It's brittle, a nightmare to maintain, and forget about trying to test it easily.
And this right here, this is the key vocabulary. The problem we're describing is called tight coupling. It's when your objects are so tangled up that you can't touch one without breaking another. What we're aiming for is the holy grail, loose coupling. That's where objects are nice and independent. They don't need to know all the messy details about each other. This makes our code flexible, reusable, and so much easier to work with. But how do we actually get from that tangled mess to this clean state?
Okay, let's take a step back from the code for a second. I've got a real-world analogy that I think makes this whole concept just click.
Just imagine a super busy airport, right? If every single pilot had to personally coordinate with every other pilot for takeoffs, landings, everything, it would be absolute, utter chaos. The complexity would be insane and the risk of a collision way too high. That is exactly the same problem as our spaghetti code. The only difference is the stakes are, a little bit higher.
And that's where the Mediator pattern comes in. It's literally the air traffic controller for our software. The main idea is to introduce one central object, the mediator, that handles all the complicated back and forth communication. So instead of objects talking directly to each other, now they only talk to the mediator. Simple as that.
And this just lays it out so perfectly, right? An airplane needs to take off. Does it call up all the other planes on the radio? No way. It just talks to the tower. The tower then handles all the coordination. It checks the runways, it looks at other air traffic, and then it sends a simple, clear yes or no back to the plane. The whole system is suddenly organized, predictable, and way safer, all because the communication is centralized.
Okay, so great analogy. But how do we actually bring this beautiful, simple idea into our software design? Let's map it out, component for component.
This table breaks it down perfectly. In our code, the air traffic tower, that's our mediator. It's the central hub. The airplanes, those are what we call colleagues. They're just the individual objects that need to get work done and talk to each other. And all those specific rules and logic inside the tower, that becomes our concrete mediator, which is where we put the actual communication strategy. The most important thing to remember here is that the colleagues, our airplanes, they only have to know about the tower. They don't need to know anything about each other.
All right, so we get how it works. Now let's talk about the why. Because the Mediator pattern has some massive upsides, but it also comes with a really big flashing warning sign you have to watch out for.
So yeah, the pros are pretty obvious, right? We get that loose coupling we were aiming for, all our communication logic is in one place, and our components become way easier to reuse. But, and this is a big but, there's a huge risk on the other side. Because you've put all that logic in one place, the mediator itself can get super complex. It can become a bottleneck or even a single point of failure for your whole system.
And that leads us right to this big warning. If you aren't careful, your nice, neat mediator can slowly turn into what's known as a God object, this one giant monstrous class that knows everything and does everything. And that just totally defeats the whole point, doesn't it? We're trying to organize complexity, not just sweep it all into one giant pile.
Okay, so keeping that big warning in mind, when is it actually a smart move to use a mediator? What are the telltale signs that this pattern is the right tool for what you're building?
So let's get practical. When should you actually reach for this pattern in your own projects? It really boils down to recognizing a certain kind of communication chaos.
Well, here are the classic signs that you might need one. First off, if your objects are all tangled up in this super complex web of communication, that's a huge flag. Another one? When a tiny change in one component causes this domino effect of changes across a bunch of others? Also, if you want to reuse a component, but you can't because it's just too tied to everything else, that's a perfect time for a mediator. And a classic everyday example is building complex user interfaces, where you have buttons, lists, and text boxes all needing to react to each other.
So when you boil it all down, the Mediator pattern is this incredibly powerful tool for bringing order to chaos. It takes that messy many-to-many communication problem and transforms it into a clean hub-and-spoke model. The trick, of course, is to use it wisely and avoid that God object trap, and that leaves you with one simple question to ask yourself. When you look at your own projects, is your code a chaotic runway or is it a beautifully controlled airspace?